What's going on, guys? And welcome to episode 29. I'm your host, Marcus. And in this episode, we are talking about stop trying to fix yourself. Now, I heard something in particular that really made me think about this because a lot of times when I'm talking about personal development, you come across a lot of people that say that it is very a toxic environment when talking about personal development. And I think it's a lot of times because people get the misconception, that you have to put forth a lot of effort to keep it up. And like anything, any good things in life, your effort has to essentially be there. If your effort is not there, right, you will not be able to achieve those things that you want, because anything that's essentially worth having is going to be hard work. And you realize that by reflecting on all those things that are easy, you realize that there is nothing on the easy side of the choice, right? It all comes down to a choice. You can choose a hard path, you can choose an easy path, and you realize that by doing this, typically the risk to reward, right? If you look at that, you look at the ROI on the easy choices. There's never anything easy. Right? It's like going to the dollar store and buying something from the dollar store and to think it's high quality, right? It normally works a little bit and then it breaks, right? And all those good things in life, all those good choices in life, right? They're going to be better quality. So your currency is essentially paying for essentially the hardship to get that thing. Where again, you go back to the simple thing, the easy thing, you're going to realize that the quality is not there, right? Because you aren't putting forth enough effort. And a lot of times we do like to cut corners. But being said, going back to self-help, self-development, and understanding from this point forward that self-development is one of those things that you're not fixing yourself. And a lot of times we like to assume that we're broken, that something's happened to us throughout our lives, right? Like we all come from different walks of life. We all have different hardships. No one out there has lived a perfect, easy life, right? It doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, you have some sort of hardship, right? Maybe you had a lot of money growing up, right? So you don't really know how to possibly even socialize, and you don't know the value of money. You don't understand a lot of different things, right? You can feel really lonely, right? Money doesn't give you value. Money is a tool that allows you to attain things or to get places a lot easier, but it doesn't give you any of the other things, right? Like friendships, networking, all those other different things that essentially have value, right? Or know that you have a purpose, right? Money doesn't give you purpose. And that's ultimately, I think, what we all strive for is purpose, in finding that flow and realizing that we, again, are not broken. And at a young age, I think we have a lot of different misconceptions when it comes to school and everything, that if we don't pass a test, that there's something wrong with us. And so we've used that model essentially on everything in our life, right? If a relationship doesn't work, it's broken, right? There's something wrong with me. Especially if you're in a very abusive relationship or anything like that, you realize that the other person, will tell you a bunch of different things. And so you believe those lies. You believe that you are essentially broken. There's something wrong with you. And a lot of times, we're so much in our head. It doesn't matter who you are. We are all in our heads. We all have things that we are dealing with, right? Even myself, right? Like I've excelled very far, but there's still things I'm always working on, right? You never get to a point where you're not working on something, right? And again, it's always comes down to the choice. So you can take the easy route or you're going to take the hard route, and realizing, well, I'm not broken. I'm just trying to improve myself. I'm trying to make myself better, because we have to understand that it's important to go into every day and to give everybody around you your best version of yourself. Now that, again, changes, right? Your best version of yourself isn't going to be the same every single day. Maybe you don't get enough rest that day. So it's going to take a little more effort for you to give your best. It may not be as good as yesterday. Maybe yesterday you had a high, and so you were very explosive. You were happy, you were go-getting, and all these other different things. And to realize that at this point, right, the next day, perhaps you woke up, right, you had a nightmare, whatever the case is, right, you got a text in the middle of the night, it kind of threw you off. And so it kind of, your best isn't going to be the same on that particular day. You have to understand that it's okay, right? We're human, we're emotional. The wiring in ourselves goes against a lot of the different things that we are trying to pursue, right? Going that hard way. When I talk about that hard choice, a lot of it is just going against your wiring, going against your conditioning, your environment that you're in, right? What is exactly going on that is stopping you from choosing that and doing those hard choices? Again, repetition helps. Repetition does help. It makes it easier. It doesn't make it so easy that you can just not have the motivation or have that continuous motivation to keep doing that hard thing. It just makes it easier and essentially greases the skid, so you are allowed to do it a lot better, making those harder choices. But being said, fixing yourself, right? Again, we're not broken. We have to remember that we are creating ourselves each and every day, and we're only essentially as good as we were yesterday. We can't go back to an old story that we were and think that that's who we are. And we have to realize that we have to essentially kill off that old story of who we are, because we have to realize that we are, that's what essentially fixes us to our past. It's what essentially fixes us to think that we're broken, fixes us to think that any new engagement with somebody, any kind of relationship, personal or professional, that it's always going to turn out the same, because we think we're broken, when in fact we realize that, well, if we make the hard choice here, it's not broken, right? And things can change. And we have to realize that, and we have to understand that. And this will allow us to propel ourselves into that destination, into that purpose that we want in our lives. And it's important that, we put self first, so that way that we know that we're aware of the choices that we make. And going into this and trying to reverse engineer this is hard, because a lot of people come from different mindsets. We have to realize that we come from different conscious levels. We come from different points in our life, right? Is it a turning point in your life? Are you so unsatisfied with where you're at that you're willing to go out and actually take the action to make the change? Because that's the only way things will change. And if you are not satisfied to this point in your life, you have to realize that all the choices that you've made up to this point, it's not saying every choice that you make is going to be a hard choice and you're going to be able to overcome it. That's not saying that. I'm definitely not that way. Every choice I even make today is not always the harder choice as opposed to the easier choice. It's finding which one holds more weight, right? Which choice holds more weight, and I'll make sure it's a priority in my day, and I'm going to execute on that hard choice, because it takes energy, right? And this is something I've talked about before, about how you have a certain amount of energy every day, and it needs to go to those ones that are your priority, making sure that you execute on that hard choice. Make sure that is their top priority during the day, right? Or self first, make sure that one gets executed. The other ones, maybe they don't hold as much weight, or maybe, you read about something, oh, well, if I did this, it improved my life tenfold as opposed to what I am doing. So you can switch priorities. It's not saying you can't do that. It's important to be adjustable. It's important to continue to obtain that knowledge. This is actually something that, I've always preached about learning and stuff like that, and it's extremely important. But I have talked about when you go through cycles, when you take a break. And myself, I've been on a cycle where I haven't studied as much. I've done a lot more meditating. I've done a lot more deep thinking about things, and going over different areas. I go over different, I've been on TikTok more. I've been on over different platforms. And everything that I go into, even all the platforms I go into and everything, right? I always try to put educational stuff in that platform, because sometimes I know the way it is and I know it's addictive, but if it can educate me on something, other viewpoints are extremely important, because I've always noticed that perspective and curiosity, right, is coming across someone that offers you a new perspective, offers you a new view on something that draws your curiosity, that's okay, well, maybe I should follow up on this. And so that's what I've been doing in this cycle, is looking at other people's perspective and kind of deep thinking about it, and how do I feel about it, and why do I feel a specific way about it, and does it fall under my beliefs? Is it against my beliefs, right? And and going this way about everything in life, and realizing that, again, you have to be flexible. We are not in some solid state, right? Our brains are very adjustable. They can adjust to change. Now, change, again, is not easy, but again, because our brain doesn't, it feels like it's only built to help us survive. We're not living in the Stone Age anymore. We're living in a very complex world because we are human and we like to make things more complicated. And we've made things actually so easy, right? We're not fighting against the basic necessities, right? We're not fighting to get water. We're not fighting to get food. We're not fighting to get shelter. Majority of us, right? If you're in the Western world, majority of the time you're not. That being said, you have a great advantage. And so you start looking and bleeding over into other things. And this is actually an idea that I've come across that is really interesting, is the fact that, we're evolving so much so that those harder choices are actually not even that bad. If you went back like 20 years ago, those hard choices that are hard to us today, they were even 10 times harder than they were before. Starting a business, right, is a good example. Like 10, 20 years ago, it was much harder. Now you have the internet. It is so much easier to create a business, right? It's utilizing the tools. We evolve so much. And so once we start evolving, we have to understand that we start becoming more lazier. Evolution has made us more lazier. And so it's in our best effort to continuously push and make those harder choices, to actually go out and not sit and tune out to those things in your life. And being said, and going back to the whole fixing yourself, again, you're not fixing, you're creating. And you realize this when you're in a long-term relationship, or anytime you are living a life. One day you wake up and you realize, where have I allowed myself to go? Like, you've essentially drifted in life, not really realizing where you want to go. And then you find yourself, and this is where I think you get a lot of this midlife crisis stuff, because you're like, oh, well, he's having a midlife crisis. And it's like, no, maybe I just woke up and realized what was going on. And so I challenge that. I challenge the beliefs. I challenge all these things. And I realize that, my life is essentially adaptable, right? I'm not broken. I just drifted. I allowed different inputs to make decisions for me. And probably a good majority of those choices that I've made have been easy choices, because I don't want to make the hard choices, to go through the pain, because anytime you make the hard choices, there's always pain involved, right? And when you go on the easier choice, there may be pain, but it may be minute compared to those heavier, bigger changes, more impactful changes that you would have essentially if you are making the tougher choices, right? And a diet is a good example of that. It is making those tough choices. It's not always easy, right? If you make it a lifestyle change, you can make it easy. You are essentially changing the perspective on the way you see it. And then it's the discipline and the patience that allow you to lose the weight, allow you to, look the way you want to look. But it's hard choices, right? It's each and every day making sure that those hard choices, you come up with an alternative, right? Like just an example is the diet is you're trying to eat healthy, and maybe perhaps you ate healthy and you're still hungry. What do? Right? Well, let me just have healthier snacks. That helps to an extent, but maybe you should just go out and take a walk, do something active, some kind of activity to get you away. And it also keeps you, active as well. And it keeps you away. It keeps you away from the food, keeps you away from all the other different things, because again, we get into that. Our evolution has put us in this bubble, essentially, where we don't have to scavenge days on end, right? Or wait for our gardens to grow to allow us to start eating stuff. And that's we have to preoccupy our brain with something else, as opposed to these easier outs, these easier ways to make us happy. Because ultimately, understanding that again, we'll fall the different inputs that we have will fall into that sensation that there's something wrong with us, will never be fixed. It is too hard to fix us. When in fact, you can just create who you want to be. And even for myself at a young age, right? I always wanted to be in shape, right? That's something I always wanted to be. I always wanted to be the confident person. I always wanted to be a funny person. I always wanted to go out and do my own thing. I always wanted to make a lot of money. I always wanted to do a bunch of different things in my life. And I had to do it step by step, right? It wasn't just an overnight success. It was dedicating that time, those hard choices, right? Making a lot more hard choices than I made easy choices, prioritizing those daily choices and being okay with that. And a lot of times, this is something I hear too, is that you take away something, making that hard choice, you think you're losing something else. You're losing an easier choice is ultimately what it comes down to, right? You're making that tough decision to not go out with friends because you want to stay home and study so you can obtain the skill that will help you advance yourself in life. You're making that tough choice. You're making the sacrifices to not go out with your friends. And then you realize, months, perhaps even years later, that they're still where they're at. And you have essentially leaped them many days, years in advance, right? And this is something I've noticed even going in the military. When I came out of the military, I've noticed a lot of my friends were the same way. Nobody changed. I changed dramatically, and they had not. Right? They were the same people I knew back in high school. Being said, it's important to know that. It's important to make tough decisions in your life. And this helps anytime you come across other times in your life, right? Because I always talked about having a point of reference and making those tough choices and realizing that the tough choices are going to get you what you want. And you have to maintain that. It's something that is like a muscle almost. And the fact that you got to put it in the reps, because if you don't put it in the reps to help you maintain those things, you realize that the harder choices, they get a little bit harder, right? And you start neglecting. And it's like that saying, right? The one time, the smallest thing that you essentially neglect, right? It bleeds over into everything else, right? Maybe you stop eating so clean during one meal, and then that bleeds over to the next meal. Or perhaps you stop studying or reading every other day, and it starts becoming, it was just a couple of days and it becomes a couple of months, right? You don't want to fall into that. And that's why auditing yourself, having that self-reflection as soon as possible helps a lot. And realizing that, this is where you're going to make those choices, being aware of that and realizing, okay, well, I'm going to go with a harder choice here, and realizing that, again, I'm trying to improve my life. I'm trying to get better, right? I want to see what I'm capable of, because a lot of us are capable of a lot of other things. And we forget that, it all comes down to your mindset. If what you tell yourself and what you believe is what you're going to think your life. And you think that you're just too broken to fix. You're too far out there, which is not the case. And we have to realize that it's going to take smaller steps. It's going to take smaller actions to get us to where we need to go. Eventually, those smaller actions compound over time and allow us to make the changes that we want. And realizing that, again, coming into any choice, right? Maybe you're trying to dramatically change your life, right? Maybe you find that you want to make that career change. Like I jumped from being telecommunications for 12 years into programming, right? It could be anything in life what you're trying to do, and you make that leap is scary. It's unknown. You have this imposter syndrome, but you have to understand that that is required, right? That is the hard choice. You will eventually get there, right? When that becomes the normal, the imposter syndrome goes away. It doesn't say it goes away 100%, but it goes away to an extent, right? That it takes the edge off. It allows you to realize, okay, well, this is who I am now. And this is why it's important not to tag yourself as, well, I do this and I do that, so that defines who I am. You should always be flexible. Like I said, like your mind is, you should always be flexible. You should always want to make the changes in your life. But to be able to do that, again, you have to realize that you are writing the story each and every day. And it's something I like to always emphasize, is the fact that you don't have to make those choices off of other people. This is where we fall off that misconception a lot, because of the fact that, you make choices based on other people's opinions You're going to live a life where you're not happy with what's going on. And you wonder, why can't it get better? And so we start looking for things, and we've been force-fed this idea that, oh, well, all you need is a Band-Aid and it's going to fix it, right? It gives you temporary relief for a gaping wound that is there. And it is easy, right? That gaping wound is easy choices. And realize, well, I can change that. That gaping wound doesn't have to be there. I could make the changes that I want in my life, and realizing that I'm creating it. I create whatever I want in my life. And it requires you to go out. It requires, there's been so many changes I've made, especially doing Discover Ignite. Like, I was never a speaker. I could never just get on here and talk. You wanted me to talk, for 30 minutes on this podcast, right? And typically what I do on these podcasts, but you're talking like that. And then I could barely talk for like 5 minutes. If it wasn't something that I wasn't essentially had the knowledge base of, I couldn't really talk about it that much. Even stuff like that I talk about now, right? It's like I felt like I didn't know enough. And then one day, when people were asking me about stuff or whatever, asking for advice, and I would give advice, I started relaying to myself, man, I actually know a lot. And I think that is the biggest thing to understand here, is that you really don't know how much you actually know until you talk about it or you try to teach somebody else. And then reflecting on that and realize, man, I actually know quite a bit. And then getting feedback, people saying, no, that's actually really good. That's really helpful. Because again, a lot of times I think we tend to forget that, we're smarter than we think we are. And, society would like to make you think otherwise. Because of, right, if you're not excelling with straight A's in school, that you will just not be anything. And that's not true, right? You have other skill sets. Maybe you are a very effective communicator, right? Maybe you are a very good artist, right? Maybe you are a very good musician, right? There are a lot of other different avenues in which you can excel at very well. And so being said, you have to make those harder choices and realizing, well, okay, if I'm going to make myself better, if I'm going to improve, right, I need to understand that, again, even if I do it and I fail, I'm not a failure, right? You don't take that failure is, well, this is going to be the rest of my life. You can't do that. You have to go against that stuff and trying to understand that, you shouldn't. Other people's opinions matter, right? If they're their family and stuff, they matter. Respect them. Yes, I understand that. Take it in, absorb it, think about it, but understand that ultimately it is your decision, right? Don't base your life of other people's decisions. Yes, maybe you have kids in your life and you have responsibility. Yes, you have responsibility. That doesn't mean you still can't make choices that put things in your favor. This is what matters. You have to realize that we have to realize that even with kids, right, there's going to be a point where your kids get old and you're going to be by yourself. It's important to have that relationship with yourself. Commit to yourself is important. That no matter what happens, I'm not going to blame myself. There's nothing to be fixed there. I am creating myself. What do I want to see myself in 5 or 10 years? Not where I'm at now. Because a lot of times when you're asking yourself this question, you don't like where you're at now. Because you are looking at other people at their finish line and thinking, well, that's where I want to be. Because we think for some reason that once we hit this utopic point in our life, right, everything is just easy. It's not. It's maintaining that mindset. It's obtaining. It's like holding up essentially your life, right? Holding up where you want to be at. It's something that has to be maintained. You have to be active with it. If you're not active with it, easy choices get you to places in life that you're not happy with because they're too easy. They hold no value to you, right? It goes back to that essentially the quality, right? The quality of the ROI is going to be essentially the effort you put into it, right? If you put harder effort into it, the better results you'll get. So make the harder choices and better results you'll get. Again, but it's not going to be, a lot of it is not an overnight choice, right? A lot of it is going to require pain, because it's painful to change stuff, right? Because we're emotional creatures. That's where the pain comes from, because we are emotional creatures. So everything that we have, whether it's addiction to food, right? If it's a relationship, if it's a job or whatever thing, the false security of a job, right? Understanding these things, it's the painfulness of not knowing, well, if I'm just used to this, even if it's painful, I'm used to this, as opposed to I'm more scared of what is on the other side. As opposed to, well, if I make the harder choice, yes, it will be a painful initially, but it will become the norm, and it won't be as hard, it won't be as painful, right? And you can start, it's like a sliding scale. That harder thing starts moving over to a little bit easier to do, right? Because the easier things are still require effort, right? They're just minimal effort, as opposed to the harder things that require more effort, right? That sliding scale goes back over to the easier side. And so that's essentially what it does. We are trying to create yourself. And creating yourself isn't going to happen by making the same decisions you've made up to this point. Or perhaps you've gotten to a point in your life where you're doing really well, but we realize that we always want to improve, right? What is the next step? I think naturally we all want to do better. What is the next step I got to do to maintain this? Or what is the next step I got to do to make myself better, or to improve other people's lives, or to make myself to the point to where I can essentially, come each and every day with my best self, even better, right? Like, because even on my bad days, I want my bad days when I'm doing my best to be better than my good days when I'm doing my best. And it's possible by making the changes, by making the harder changes. And again, taking those harder choices and moving over on the scale to the easier choices, right? Because you start creating those habits and all those other things that allow you to execute even more, a lot more fluidly. And realizing that, from this perspective, it's a lot better. It's better than it was on that side, right? Where the easier choices. I think that's the biggest thing we have to understand is, perspective wise, you think, well, it's just a couple little choices. What big of a difference can it make? Until you start doing it and you realize how you get that new perspective of how big of a difference it does make. Because over time, that compounding effort, a lot of those harder choices that become easier, right? Because you're starting to put it more on autopilot. So it makes it easier for your brain to execute on these things. Again, perhaps it's getting rid of a relationship or whatever the case is. You realize that by moving that piece out of your environment, yes, it's painful initially, but ultimately it starts getting better. You start feeling better. And not only does it change your environment, yes, it was scary, but now I have essentially a new routine, which is much better. I feel more confident in myself. I feel a lot better in life. I'm able to make better choices now that I've removed myself from that environment, had myself in this environment. I can adopt some other things that I've wanted to do, incorporate into my life. Right? We have to understand that everything in life is adjustable. It just depends on which things you turn the volume up on, right? Which things have your attention, which things have your priority, and turning the ones off that aren't a big priority to you, making the harder choices to put you in specific situations that allow you to improve the life the way you see fit. And so understand that, again, you're not broken at any point in this whole thing, because we are learning throughout this whole process. It's a learning process. You're never broken. You're not at fault, right? There's always consequences. You can always do things that have more consequences than others, and that's different, right? You can go out and hurt somebody and go to jail, right? I'm not talking about those. There's always consequences to different things. But when I'm talking to more realistic, when you're trying to make life changes, understand that it is not as bad as you think it is, right? And you can make the changes to make it to where you want to go. And realize that, if there's people there that love and support you, or whatever the case is on the other side, right? Don't neglect them, right? Don't do that. Always support your system, but you always want to support yourself first, right? You always want to have that conviction in yourself first. You always want to commit to yourself first. If you commit to yourself first and do what you can for yourself, then you build out the environment. And then you make the change, you make the harder changes. Everything is a change, the harder choice. You're taking a harder choice, you're taking the easier choice. What does it ultimately matter here? And being mindful of these choices every time they come up. Because the more easier choices you take, you realize that you're going to not be in the place that you want to be.